I'd like to welcome everyone back to our webinar. And today we have an exciting opportunity to discuss with a few colleagues from other sports what their sports have gone through and how they've made adaptations to their sports with regard to changes in beach volleyball and rugby sevens. As we're going through we will be going through similar changes and possibly different changes for 6v6 for our Olympic movement for lacrosse. So I'd like to welcome Ed Drakich to the webinar today. Ed was a former national team member for both indoor volleyball and beach volleyball. From 1985 to 88, he played on the indoor national team, and then he was a beach player primarily for the Canadian beach volleyball national team from 89 to 96, culminating with being a 1996 in the Olympic Games in Atlanta. Post-career, Ed's worked with the Ontario Volleyball Association as both the beach director and technical director. He's worked with Volleyball Canada as a technical director and is currently the beach high performance director with Beach Volleyball Canada, or with Volleyball Canada, the beach volleyball side of things. He's also been a university head coach with the University of Toronto men's indoor team and is a beach technical delegate for International Volleyball Federation from 1996 until the present. And he's part of the Olympic Control Committee from the past 4 Olympics now. So give a nice welcome to Ed. And returning to the webinar is Suzanne Chaulk, who previously this afternoon was part of our Women in Coaching session. Brief update on Suzanne is again, she's rugby coach for over 40 years and was one of the first rugby coaches in Canada to coach on the international scene with rugby sevens. And Suzanne's also a graduate of the National Coaching Institute in Victoria and is a passionate mentor coach for both male and female coaches and has been a great advocate in my coaching career. So with no further ado, I will pass it over to Ed to start out, and we'll let him speak with everyone here.
Thank you very much for the introduction, James. I'm quite excited. I think it's really good news that lacrosse, it looks like the 6-on-6 game has been announced officially. Is it for Los Angeles, correct?
That's correct, for Los Angeles 2028.
Yeah, so that's great. They've given you 7 years lead time. That's great. We've gone through a lot of growing pains in beach volleyball, and I look at the similarities, and I see a lot of similarities. I was looking at just reading a few articles yesterday about the announcement in the Olympics, and I can see that there's already some people that are skeptical or concerned, and some even hostile to the form of the game that has been introduced into the Olympics. And I think that's very similar to what happened in beach volleyball. We were officially named as an Olympic sport for the Atlanta Olympics for 1996 in 1993. So that's when, so I guess your 2021 is like our 1993. And I can tell you, I was fortunate enough to be an athlete at those games in 96. And the questions, there are people in the association that were dead set against beach volleyball, like really didn't want to be part of it, like people within the association. And even we had outside people questioning whether it's even a sport or whether it should be in the Olympics. After the first Olympics, nobody's asking those questions anymore. And we also, I think, a similarity with lacrosse, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems to me that Canada would have, in lacrosse in general, you'd have a leg up on a lot of other countries that haven't really gotten into lacrosse yet, right? And that was the case for us in beach volleyball. I know myself, I had been playing beach volleyball for 20 years before Volleyball Canada got into beach volleyball in 1989. So we came with a lot of natural advantages. And in the first Olympic Games, we qualified 3 teams and we won a bronze medal at the first Olympic Games. We had a big advantage, but we squandered that advantage. And there was a couple realities that come into effect that I would like to pass on to you for learnings that we had. And that's, the Olympics is a big deal. Being in the Olympics is a big deal. Within Canada, it's important. You know, there's now involvement with the Canadian Olympic Committee, Sport Canada, Own the Podium money opens up within the Canadian sports system. But I think really importantly, other countries in the world are going to be all in. They're going to, now that it's an Olympic sport, we found in beach volleyball, other countries, we didn't do this in Canada. We just sort of relied on the fact, look, our athletes are good. They've been playing for a long time. We're quite developed. Other countries invested systemically right off the bat. And we paid a price for that. We paid a price that, we won a bronze medal that first game. The next 2 Olympics, we got some 5th place finish. And then by the time it got to Beijing, we had no one qualify for the Olympic Games. And the rest of the world had left us left us behind in terms of development. And we went through a series of, while other countries invested systemically, I can just give an example of Germany. Germany was a country when it was first announced, they were not strong at beach volleyball. They were actually quite weak, not a warm weather country similar to Canada, but they invested systemically from the beginning. And they won the gold medal in 2012 in men and 2016 in women. And they're basically a powerhouse because they put that investment up front. And there's many countries that just at the Tokyo Games where they basically just, they were not really ever at the Olympics in indoor volleyball. And they got medals at beach volleyball, Norway, Qatar, Switzerland, these countries that have never been to the Olympics for indoor volleyball. And one of the mistakes we did is we didn't go all in with dedicated staff to lead and drive the process, because you're going to have to go through athlete, coach, and officials development. It's a different form of the sport. I feel it's similar to beach volleyball. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, but there are a subset of athletes that play in the traditional game, either field or box lacrosse, that will excel in 6-on-6, right? Not all the athletes that play would transfer over. I was reading there's a physical component in the 11-11 on the men's side that is not going to be at the Olympic Games. Is this correct? My information?
Yeah, that's correct. There are currently some. There's a women's field game. There's a men's field game, which are 2 different games in and of themselves. And then there's going to be that 6-on-6 game that's a hybrid of that, as well as the box game will have some skill set. So because the box game is on a smaller playing surface, players are required to work in a lot tighter space. So skill development, for highly skilled players, they can adapt to that larger area a little easier. So in that context, our box players can really possibly flourish in the 6-on-6 game. So we're going to be able to recruit players from both box and field, but there will be an adaptation for both players, coaches, and officials.
Right. So that's the same as us. Not in Canada, all our beach players came from indoor volleyball because we don't have beach year round. 8 months of the year, Canada's, we're shoveling snow, and or 6 months anyways. And so all our players came up from indoor volleyball. There's a subset of players that could play beach volleyball that not all the indoor volleyball players could play beach volleyball. So it sounds like it's similar to your situation. And what the process we went through to show the lessons we learned, which is, I'm saying, please don't do what we did, is initially we just dealt only with the senior teams. We dealt only with those teams that were, going to the Olympics. I was one of those teams, and the top teams for the first almost 3 Olympics. We didn't do any junior or development or anything. We only dealt with those senior teams. That was the first mistake we made. Then the second mistake we made was, well, okay, we need to do some development. Let's give our high performance director of indoor volleyball, let's give him the beach portfolio as well. And that didn't work out because it needs its own, it's completely, while it's similar, and you talked about the transfer, you need dedicated person to think about it, to be a champion of it, and to create the athlete, coach, administrator, volunteer development systems to move things forward. So that was the second mistake we made. The third mistake we made is, okay, we need someone dedicated. Let's hire a head coach. So then we hired a head coach, a head national head coach as the first full-time hire. And that was a mistake because the coach, it's important to have coaches. You'll need those coaches. But our program didn't really turn around. As I said, and by the time we were in Beijing, nobody qualified for the Olympics. We hadn't had any top 5 results in the last quad at all, and in the world tour. And then in 2011, we hired a high performance director dedicated. And since that time, things have really turned around. We've got a system in place. We put 8 teams at the last 3 Olympics. We've had 3 top 5 finishes at the Olympics, and we're even world champions. In 2019, our women's team are world champions for the first time in any discipline of our sport. We won a medal and they're world champions. And so the first thing I would say is you need a dedicated high performance director or high performance manager as quickly as you can. Get that person, get it into place. That's what the other countries did. And they caught up to us and they passed us, and we've been playing catch up now for the last decade. The other thing I would say is provincially as well, encourage them to hire at least one person dedicated to this sport, dedicated, thinking, and it's really important that this person think about what they need to do, because the answers will be different in all different provinces and nationally about setting up development systems. There's going to have to go through coaching certification processes, coaching development. And there are, I used to say there are four types of people within our association. There were some people, quite a small group, that embrace beach volleyball. I imagine there will be some people that will embrace 6-on-6 within Lacrosse Canada, right? There's some that are going to be skeptical. There's some that are going to be concerned about, well, we could lose athletes at this level, and there's going to be some that are hostile to the sport. Over the years, that the concerned and the hostile group has gone down, and I suspect the same thing will happen with lacrosse. And basically, the reason is that the athletes drag those leaders to the other side, because there are athletes that want to play the sport, that want to go to the Olympic Games, and they're gonna, and if there's a club that doesn't have 6-on-6, they may leave their traditional club to go to a club that has 6-on-6. One quick story: when I started at the OVA, I was the beach director, the first full-time beach person in the country in 2000. And I got a call my first week by a regional president and a club president who called me and said, I just want to let you know that I don't think we should be doing beach volleyball at the Ontario Volleyball Association. I don't believe it should be a sport that is even funded, and I don't agree with your position. So I said, well, thank you very much for the welcome to my new job. 1 year later, that person called me up and said, okay, help me start a beach club, please. And I said, what happened? And he said, if I don't, I'm going to lose my athletes, because they want to play beach volleyball. So what'll happen is the concerned people and the hostile people will come over time. One university in Canada West just announced that they have a beach program, and it took 25 years from when I first spoke to them. But that's what it takes, is that dedicated person that's not a coach. They could coach that first dedicated person, but they're more is to think about the sport, to put it together, and to give them some budget and move things forward. And we didn't do it for 18 years. And I would say, my advice is get to that as fast as you can, because other countries will. and you're only 7 years away from 2028. So that's my opening statement.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Ed. We'll answer some questions after Suzanne's all finished up with hers. Amazing insights, and yeah, there are a lot of parallels between beach volleyball and the sixes for lacrosse, I think, upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome, Suzanne.
It was funny listening to you, Ed. I could just replay so many different things that occurred for us with rugby sevens, and it's the same, right? So and all of those, violently opposed, the purists of the game, and the holdouts that just don't seem to want to they just resist change. They have an idea of what it is they want to do. So I'm not going to repeat all of those issues that you've raised, because they're shared, and I think that you built a really good picture of it. So I'm going to switch the lens a little bit, and I'm going to look at it from the perspective of a coach, right? Because that is my experience. I haven't led this file with Rugby Canada. I've been a coach at the beginning. So and our situation is a little bit different than lacrosse, but what I'll try and do is draw those links to where it's similar, and then draw the links to where it might be a little bit different. And I think in terms of where we're different, our starting point is different. And that's neither good nor bad. So the 6 versus 6 game is brand new. That, for me, that means you have an opportunity to develop it in the image that you perceive to be wonderful, right? With rugby sevens, it has been around, and people are always surprised to know this. It's been around since 1883. So it is almost as long in its history as our 15s game. So, the purists somehow seem to forget that. But typically it ended up being that sort of recreational version where people played it in the off season when their club, membership was depleted by vacation and things like that. And I all of my playing career, I played sevens, loved it, had a great time doing it, and always bemoaned the fact that it was only available during July, or after the season was over in November, kind of thing. And then teams continued to play it a lot all across the world, but again, pretty recreationally. And then in 1999, the IRB started that World 7 series that we see so much of now. And at that time, it was just men's teams. And in 2004, when I was appointed to coach that first inaugural FISU World Championships, there was no comparative women's program anywhere in the country. And in fact, none of our organizations were fielding sevens, except for the odd tournament here and there, which typically wasn't coached, wasn't looked at as a formal structure at all. So for me, that meant the challenges from a coaching perspective was that the majority of athletes I'd be working with had no experience in sevens, starting from square one. There was absolutely no financial support. So this was self-funded. The players and coaches had to pay their own way. There were and because of that lack of sevens programming, there was very few training competitions. So you went in blind, right? You trained, you did what you could, you scrimmaged where you could, and you went in blind, hoping that what you'd done was good. And fortunately, I had, I'm always looking for game film. So I had some game film and some expectation of what I might see. Being able to bring them in Canada anytime, bringing them together to train and prepare is always a challenge. And that's not going to be any different for lacrosse. And then finding a balance, because we were this new program added to this landscape, competing for the athletes, trying to balance the different programming that all of our athletes were participating in. And as we went down the road with FISU Championships, I was actually competing for national team players. So the 15s program was saying, no, we need them for a training camp. And I'm saying, no, I need them for a world championship, but won't go there. So from a coaching lens though, so if you're thinking about coaching in this new environment, there's definitely going to be adjustments that you needed to make. So for me as a coach, I had to sit there and think about, okay, so what's different? All of my coach education had been focused on 15s. What do I do that's going to be different as a sevens coach? So strength and conditioning requirements changed significantly, right? I had to shift my emphasis from aerobic capacity to aerobic power. I had to build power much more than just strength, right? Because the collisions at a fast pace and tempo are much more, or can be much more powerful. I had to think about that new pace and what it meant. So, and I think that's going to be very similar in lacrosse. So the pace of the game is faster. And so that means that their ability to execute skills has to be done much more quickly. And so we're going to be changing how we train those slightly. The mental skills that we have to do, now they're making decisions. Games will be decided in split seconds. And if your athletes aren't able to read and react to that quickly, right? So working on those mental skills that they need to be able to do in order to execute that is going to be crucial. And refining things like speed and agility. Again, so, you know, in our slower paced games, they're pretty good and we're pretty happy with them. But for me in sevens, and that's where it's slightly different, bigger spaces. So although we went to a smaller group, we still played in the huge space. So it changed how our spatial awareness, how we saw it, how we created it. So tactically, that's going to adjust. You're going to think about your tactics, adjust them to the different variables that they're working in, and go from there. What doesn't change, and what shouldn't have anybody nervous at all, is the fundamental technical skills with which you play your sport. Those are the same, right? The only thing that we're going to be thinking about differently is how we train them. And those are the same variables we manipulate every day in our training sessions. So we change the space in which the athlete is working a particular skill. We add defense, we increase the pressure, we decrease the pressure, we change the numbers of people working in that space. And that's no different here, right? This time we're just making those changes based on a different version of our game. The other thing that was really huge for us in sevens was there's no specialized skills or position specific skills. Scrummaging takes 2 seconds. Your mother could do it in a sevens game. Well, maybe not, but it doesn't require that same, like we spend hundreds of hours working with our national team athletes in the 15s game on scrummaging because of the extreme specialization of that skill set. In sevens, typically anybody on your team should be able to scrummage, right? You just pick the 3 that do it better than anybody else. Everybody should be able to kick. Everybody should have the same skill set. So it really does become that pure all skills for all players, which is really awesome. And from that perspective, I think it helps our 15s game. But speaking to some of the issues that, again, so we were exactly the same. There were people that were excited that we were going to be doing the Olympics. And I think those were the people that were already involved in the 7th circuit. So they were really invested. But then the purists from the 15 side, typically well-established nations, said, no, can't happen. This is terrible. It's going to kill the 15s game. And what it typically comes down to is what's in it for me. So if this new game, is it going to take money away from other national team programs? Is it going to take players away from other national team programs? Right? So those are the things that everybody frets about. Is it going to cost me? And I'll be honest, it might. It might cost you. The Olympics is a big deal, as Ed said. It is a huge deal. And so, yeah, it may, I mean, national team programs have as much money as they have. And you have 7 years to prepare. So you have 7 years to line up sponsors and get a lot of those things in place. So it might not cost, but it could. And you just need to figure out, how do you problem solve through that? Because at the end of the day, your national team programs are competing with each other for resources anyway. You're just adding another one to the mix, right? So it's just, how do we do that? How do we resolve that? You're competing for players. And in rugby, the key for us, and I think this may be a misstep. So when Ed's talking about things that are a misstep, we have dedicated our sevens programs. And that's a good thing. On the women's side, it's better because they qualified for On the Podium money. So it's been easier for them to be a dedicated program. And that's where On the Podium can sometimes be a good thing and a bad thing. Our men failed to qualify. So that meant then that the resources that Rugby Canada had got split between the 15s and the 7s. And that led to some issues around players being expected to play for both and stretching them across that piece. And I don't think, most of you probably are aware that our 7s men's team was on strike a few years ago for that very reason, right? So yes, it can create those issues. But the other thing I want to speak to, because I know with lacrosse, you're working really hard at building your programming, right? And growing your game. So I thought I would just sort of close off with a couple of sort of highlights of where we have seen the introduction of sevens at the Olympics really benefit rugby. And we didn't need it in the world. Rugby was well established. Our World Cup has more viewers than the Olympics. And I mean, we don't lack in that regard, right? So we didn't need this to help grow our game. But what we did think was that it would help us grow our game in places that it didn't typically exist, right? Not the first tier nations, but emerging nations and the rest of it. So when I was looking up to see what some of the stats were in terms of what the benefits of sevens have been, because we've now been in 2 Olympics. So a bit better reflection. The global audience of fans has increased by 30 million people, bringing the total to 168. That's particularly significant because the fan base that we've seen the biggest increase, it is doubled since 2013, which was the year before Rio, in the emerging nations where we're working to grow the game. So that really makes a difference when we're trying to grow the game. The smaller roster, which is similar again to lacrosse, the smaller roster means that emerging or developing nations can field a competitive team, whereas they might not be able to in 15s. And a good example of that is Fiji. So in Rio, there was I think they were the fairy tale story of Rio. The Fijian men's rugby team took gold. And it was the first gold medal that Fiji had ever won in any Olympics, right? So that was a huge moment for the nation of Fiji, and could easily have happened to any of those other nations, right? And for us in rugby, until you reach high performance level, there's no imperative for you to choose 15s over 7s. And in fact, I think one of the mistakes we've made is we have not established 7 structured programming across the country. It's lacking. So it continues to be played in little tournaments here, there, and wherever, but our clubs are not offering athletes an opportunity to develop that part of their game. And the provinces have tried and failed and tried again to establish programs. So I think we're not growing the game as well using 7s as other nations are. And I think that's sad, because we are an emerging nation in rugby. So we need to be able to do that. And we tend to rely on finding our athletes, high-level athletes, provincial level teams. So we'll cherry pick from provincial level 15-a-side teams. And then we tag on to the RBC combines that they hold, which means that every single time we're starting from scratch and teaching an athlete fundamental skills, instead of taking an athlete who has those and taking it, further by putting them in a high performance environment. So I think, there's a lot of lessons for us to be learned. But again, it comes back to resources, competing for them, but making sure that we dedicate our time to giving athletes the opportunity to do it. And I think our lack of programming is going to cost us, because we're already starting to see athletes show up at a club and say, how come we don't? How come we don't? How come there's no 7s events, right? And it's because the Olympics is a big thing. So for the people in lacrosse, this is exciting. This is an amazing opportunity. There will be opportunities for people to coach, to play, to officiate in the Olympics, which I don't know. I think that's second to none.
You're right, Suzanne. It is a really exciting opportunity right now, and we are literally in our infancy with that 6s. There have been a few tournaments that have been held. One a few weeks ago in Florida. There's another one upcoming in October down in Maryland, and so we're looking at kinds of things of how we can we're looking for as much information as we can to speak with coaches, speak with officials, speak with players that will be there, but at the same time, there's the other part on the home front. There's one thing of talking to our national team coaches and players and whatnot, but as Ed said, there's a bit of an issue with, we've got our high performance guy who's a head coach, but what about everybody else? And I guess my first question was for you would be, Ed, is how did beach volleyball transition from the senior high performance to growing the game at grassroots and beyond that, so that you could, because obviously it's taken 18 years to kind of get back to where it started, right?
I just, Suzanne's words were I couldn't agree more with what she said. It's so the alignment is amazing. And that's why I said PSO and NSO. You need, even at the PSO level, there has to be a dedicated person for this discipline. But what I can tell you is each province will be different. You can't let the person think about it. That's I guess I like to talk about that. They need to think sort of 24/7 in the 6-on-6 game. What do they need to do to develop athletes, coaches, and officials? Because across the board, you're going to need it. And until you do this, you're not really gonna move the game forward, to be honest, to be really frank. Sorry, what was your question? Did that sort of answer your question?
So yeah, a little bit, but so with beach volleyball, how did you obviously with there needs to be buy-in at the PSO level as well as at the NSO level. But in terms of grassroots, how did you transition from sixes indoors to I guess it's not this is one of the things with beach a lot of people don't understand. It's not just twos. You do have fours and things like that in recreational settings.
Right. Right. At the Olympics, it's doubles only, which is a unique game. Okay. Because you're forced to do what you're bad at. So for example, if I can't serve receive, if I can't pass the ball, I'm going to get every serve my whole life. If I can't set, I'm going to set continuously. And if I'm a great spiker, I'll never spike because they'll never serve me. So the doubles game is unique. The fours game and the sixes on the beach is similar to indoor volleyball. You can keep setting the same person. In beach, it's exactly the opposite psychology. You don't get to do what you're good at, and you are forced to do what you're bad at. I said, imagine in basketball if the center had to dribble the ball up and had to shoot threes. That's what happens in beach. You have to do what you're bad at. So the game rewards the all-around player, the player with no weaknesses. Now, I imagine that's somewhat similar to sevens. Yeah. And I imagine it's going to be similar to 6-on-6 lacrosse, that it's going to be the all-around player that has a lot of skill. Apparently, there's not going to be a lot of contact allowed at the Olympics, right?
That's right.
And so it's really going to be about skill, about speed, about stamina, strength. Those things are going to come into play. And an athlete with a glaring weakness can be exposed, like in beach volleyball. What happened is, to be honest, in Ontario, the vast majority of the Olympians and the original top players came from Ontario because Ontario in 2000 hired a beach director. And it's to the point now where almost all our best athletes play beach in the summer in Ontario. Okay. And there's only two provinces that have dedicated people to beach volleyball, Ontario and Quebec. And the other provinces, it's a one-off whether an athlete develops on their own, but there's no systemic development. And I've been begging the provinces since I was the technical director for Volleyball Canada in 2004 to hire someone dedicated person. And it took 15 years for Quebec to do it. Now Quebec is going like this in terms of their development of athletes. You really need to get the provinces in because, you know, when you're in high performance sport, it's always about the next group coming up, right? It's the next people. It's the only way you're going to get better is by developing it. And what Suzanne said about these other countries, it's so true. Like Qatar got a medal in beach volleyball. Norway got a medal in beach volleyball. No chance Norway will be at the Olympics qualifying through indoor volleyball to qualify for, no chance. I'm involved with our federation is called NORCECA. It's North America, Central America, Caribbean, all these islands. And these islands, like Cayman Islands has 30,000 people. How can Cayman Islands compete with the United States with 330 million in indoor volleyball? No chance because of the number of athletes you need. But in beach volleyball, can they find two athletes? You betcha. They can find two athletes. They got some of the best beaches in the world. They should be beach federations. And that's the thing is that there's going to be some federations that are going to say, this 6-on-6 lacrosse, this can be our game. This can be our game. And I'm telling you, it's by the Olympic announcement, it's happening already. They are putting their systems together. And while Canada could probably do well in 2028, even if you don't do anything, the future won't be good if you don't get all in right now.
Yep.
Because the other countries are going to do it. And so the answer I would say is get someone thinking about it full time, provincially and nationally, full time. And that's a big sacrifice, right? It's easy for me to say that. It's hard for provinces and for the NSO to, okay, let's make a staff person that's just doing this. But I'm telling you, it's worth its weight in gold if you do it.
Yeah. So in speaking about a beach player needing to have all the tools, from an LTAD perspective, at the grassroots level, we want to teach all of our athletes all of the skills and tools anyway, don't we?
And that's the beauty of this. What the people are starting to realize in volleyball, it's taken 25 years, a little frustrating for me, is that beach volleyball is the antidote to the over specialization that we have in indoor volleyball, where the young athlete, if they're tall, we put them in the middle and they block, and if they're short, they set, and all this stuff. And they get pigeonholed, and then when they get to higher levels, they're out of the game because they don't have the skills. In beach volleyball, I'll tell you, you think you're a big hot shot indoor, big tall guy. Guess what? Now you got to set every ball. You're never going to get a spike. And it's such a great antidote. And they get so many contacts that what we're realizing is the best thing in the off season is to do the other discipline. And that sounds to me like could be a solution, right? Like, do you have a season that is are they the same season? Like, that's the thing is with us, indoor volleyball is basically September to end of May, and beach volleyball is June to the end of August sort of thing. And there are countries in the world that are actually divided that way. They said, we're not going to do indoor volleyball in the summer months, and we're not going to do beach volleyball in the winter. Switzerland did that only because they were worried beach volleyball would take over because they're not so strong in indoor volleyball. So I think that, I mean, I don't know, but if someone is weak in some areas, wouldn't playing 6-on-6 in an off season be really helpful for their skill development, especially for young kids?
Yeah.
And actually, when we look at the that original world circuit for sevens that the men were part of, they used that as a development vehicle for their national team players.
Of course.
And typically, they were the players that went on to play 15s in key decision-making roles. So, right. I mean, people like Jonah Lamu.
You need skilled players. You need players with fitness. You need, so like from what I see of the games, someone that's a superstar at sevens could be quite helpful on 15s.
Yeah.
So
not all 15 with that skill set, but those ones can be helpful. And I suspect will be the same in lacrosse. But the biggest thing I would say is for those that are worried about taking away from the sport, we're not in communist China and we're not in Russia. Athletes have free will to choose what they want to do. And if there's an athlete that wants to do 6-on-6, embrace it. And not try to steer them, because you know what? We can't, I don't know about you, but I can't tie strings on their hands and make them play something they don't want to play. Yeah. We're not in China, we're not in Russia. Yeah. And so I think that free will is going to decide things, and that free will is what moved some of our concerned and hostile people over, because the athletes, we're even starting to see it. A quick story, NCAA women's volleyball is massive in the NCAA, okay? Indoor volleyball. Yeah. Just to give you an example, because of Title IX, which is equaling the scholarship between men and women, and in men, they have a football team with 100 scholarships. Women in volleyball, they have 12,000 scholarships every year for women's volleyball, 12,000 across the NCAA and NAIA. And you know how many they have for men? 100. Total in the United States. They have 100 total in the United States, 12,000 in the US for women. But so they had a vote amongst Div 1 indoor volleyball coaches for women, very powerful group, very powerful. And they voted not to include beach volleyball because these coaches were concerned about losing athletes. So that happened the first year. Well, what happened is the Div 2 schools embraced beach volleyball, embraced it. And then when the Div 1 coaches went to go recruit athletes, they saw that some of the best athletes were going to the Div 2 schools because they wanted to play beach and indoor volleyball. And the second year they had a vote and they said, oh, yes, we're in now. And then there's a 60 or 65%, and it's one of the fastest growing sports in the NCAA. So even there, the skeptics and the hostile got dragged in because the free will of the athletes to do what they want to do. And so if there's people that are going to be against 6-on-6, they need to wake up, because it's going to happen. People are going to want to go to the Olympics. Athletes are going to want to play, and it's going to need to be developed right down to the grassroots. And so if the provinces don't embrace it, the athletes are it's going to come from the ground up if you don't do it, but that's really slow.
Yeah. So,
you know, that sounds like a bit of your experience.
Oh, one of the conversations that's been consistent so far is where does it fit in terms of schedules? Where's the season? Are they one-off events and things like that? Because we have our traditional box season, which starts after hockey season, because we play the box in the hockey arena.
Yeah,
so
in the hockey arena.
We're at the mercy of hockey to a certain degree. And then our field seasons can be at various different times of the year, because our country's 6,000 kilometers wide. So BC can play almost all year on the field outside, where in the prairies, you know, where it gets cold fairly early, or, you know, September down east, you know, we get some of the hurricane rain, you know, after effects and things like that. So the weather can really affect our field season. So where does it fit? There have been some conversations about will it take athletes away from men's field, women's field, box, and things like that. And I think you're in the right area of kids are going to play what they want to play, and it'll find its niche eventually. We don't have too much longer here.
So can I answer your question? What I was saying is in each of the provinces and nationally, get that one person to think and consult and decide what the season is. There's no answer. The answer is it might be different in all different provinces. I imagine BC will be very different from Newfoundland in terms of their season, different from Ontario. And nationally, that's what I'm saying. The person has to think. Now, not just think in a cubicle by themselves, but also consult people, look at best practices around the world, that sort of things, analyze the game. And then I think you can come to that. Don't get a committee to decide this. Hire someone that they're held accountable and they're living and breathing it. The sacrifice is create that salary.
Right.
Create that salary for that person to be the champion of that discipline and to figure that out.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you're talking about the logistics for your smaller game, is that typically it's played in a tournament format, right? So you're not having to dedicate weeks and weeks and weeks of league play. Right. It's about maybe 2 months with a bi-weekly, tournament,
a weekly
tournament, right?
Like a tournament every weekend sort of thing, or every other weekend, that sort of thing. That's how it is in beach volleyball. Beach volleyball season starts when our indoor nationals end at the beginning of June and goes till nationals is the end of August. And that's the beach season, Now, those that are serious and want to go higher, they go and train indoor and beach, or a lot of our women now, there's a lot of scholarships, NCAA women's beach now as well. But so does that make sense? Is that I think you gotta don't rely on the system to develop from the bottom. Take the lead and try to get the provinces to take the lead, so it'll be faster than like we did. Don't make the mistakes we did.
Okay. So we have our participants here. Any participants have any questions for Suzanne and Ed in the Q&A, and we can take a quick look, and we'll take a few questions for them, but otherwise we can end this session fairly quickly. I know we have a couple people out there. Yeah. No questions. All right. Well, I will ask one more question. What would a group, if you were to pull a group together Obviously we need provincial input. We need a national, Ed, you said having a person at the national office being the champion of this. When that person's having conversations, who needs to be involved? Obviously, we're probably talking about coaches, officials.
Well, that person has to set up, I would submit, an athlete development framework, a coach development framework, and an officials development framework. Now, ideally, there will be some athletes, some coaches, and some officials that'll gladly come over and get things started. But they're going to need to start little subcommittees or working groups to do all those things. Like, there's a big job ahead. It's a big job to create, you've got a whole new, this is a big deal. As we said, both Suzanne and I said, the Olympics is huge. And other countries, especially ones that aren't in lacrosse right now, are going to go in with both feet. And it is a bit of an advantage, as Suzanne said. You have 7 years, and this is a new discipline. It's not like any other country is great at 6-on-6 right now. This is a new thing. So in a way, this is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Okay. Shelley from our last session has a question. What steps or rule changes would need to be made to the game to have it included in school curriculum or in school sport in Canada? That's a really good question. I can't really answer that, to be honest, because I know we don't usually play box in the school system. There are some provinces where they play field, for instance, and our provincial people could speak more to that. But that's a really good question.
Well, but in terms of, so it seems to me like 6-on-6 is a big opportunity for this, because to get 11-on-11, that's hard to do in a phys ed class. As an example, it sounds to me like 6-on-6 is made for school. Like, in terms of, I don't know, but again, these champions that you get, right? Like this, certainly the full-time person, but maybe there's some volunteer people as well that could be advisory committee to this person or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that these are the sort of things to think about. Like, I don't know myself, but beach volleyball is much more accessible than indoor because you only need 4 to play each other, right? You don't need 12. You need 4. So here you need 12 total as opposed to 22 to play. Seems to me like, it's 11-on-11 regular, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, Suzanne, don't you think that's a big opportunity for schools?
I think it's a huge opportunity. And I think that the sevens, and we haven't done a very good job of it in the school system here. We do hold sevens tournaments in the fall, and we do 15s in the spring. But leverage things like, so we really leverage touch rugby, and you could play non-contact lacrosse in the school, right? As part of this feeder system. Schools tend to buy in a little more when there's an Olympics in the picture. That is gold when you're trying to get somebody to buy into something that's going on, and every school wants to be part of that journey. So if you made it non-contact, and that's the trick, make it clean, make it
Isn't that the
safe.
rules though? Isn't this 6-on-6 game non-contact basically?
It's non-collision. It's non-collision. We'll say.
Non-collision. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you got to remember that your high school programs and your school programs are entry-level programs for kids to learn the sport. So you don't want contact in those anyway. Thinking back to the discussion that was occurring earlier today here, you're trying to tackle some of those issues now in terms of developing athletes. So use a you wouldn't be a touch version of the game for you, but use a non-contact version of the game. And there you're building the foundational skills they need to be able to compete in any lacrosse game, right? But they're specifically playing something that's easy for a school to put together. A tournament takes no time or money. Busing kids to a weekly game does, right? So this is, from an affordability perspective, this is a far better vehicle to put in schools than either box or field. And I guess the one point I didn't address when we were talking earlier, and I really wanted to, is I think if you can move the lacrosse community away from trying to identify it as either box or field and just get them to recognize that it's a whole new beast, then there'll be less of that competing, oh, but it should be this, oh, but it should be that. and it will just be, oh, wow, look at this new version of lacrosse we get to play, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, our time is up, unfortunately. Ed, Suzanne, thank you so much for participating and your wisdom, and hopefully we can take some of this and we can implement some of these ideas and thoughts. And you know, sixes will be a welcome addition to the Olympics, along with rugby sevens and beach volleyball.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a 5-minute break and we'll come back to our return to sport session, our final session of the day.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah.
And that's Shelley Coolidge asking good questions.
Thanks, James. Thanks,
Thank
Suzanne.
you so much,
See ya.
Ed. Thanks, Suzanne. That was awesome. I really appreciate you guys.
All right. Good luck.
All right. Thanks so much.